Welcome to the Flex Web video series. I'm your host, Marcus Merritt. Today, I want to talk about the subrental resource type. I fairly frequently get questions and concerns with customers who are trying to use the subrental resource type in a way that is not intended and not its best practice. And they get some unintended results that they come across as bugs, and they're not exactly bugs. It's just because, again, it's not best practice. So in this, I want to talk about first why customers are trying to do this, because I do understand what their desire, what they're trying to accomplish with it. I want to then talk a little bit more about how the resource is supposed to work and why that is. I want to talk about a couple of the specific things that are happening for people, and they're finding these unintended consequences from it. And then at the end, we'll talk a little bit about what are kind of some better recommended practices to accomplish some of the same things without using the subrental resource type. Okay, so I have this quote here that I've made. And in it, I've got this projector here that I'm short, and so I'm going to plan to make a subrental arrangement. And I see fairly frequently where a customer says, when I do that, I would like to change this resource type to be subrental, so that two things. First, I can better communicate to myself and maybe even to my customer, though some people don't want to do that, some people do, that it is a subrental item. But also, I want to specifically then say, right now I have a 10% discount on this, but when I do it as a subrental, I don't want there to be a discount applied to that item anymore. Okay? So those are the common things. And you see again, as I select this on the default settings, you cannot do that, but I technically can change the settings to make that applicable, but again, is not recommended practice. Okay? So let's talk a little bit about why that is the case, why it's not the recommended practice, and then we'll talk a little bit more about the consequences. So in here, I'm going to go to my system settings and my resource types. And in this, we'll see for my subrental resource type, it is for inventory, but the key thing here is in the availability mode, that it is a temporary asset that is applicable toward rental items. Okay? As a temporary asset, what that means is it's an incoming asset that we know is not going to be permanent, but is going away. Okay? It's going to disappear afterwards. We're going to remove it from the system. Okay? Unlike these backorder items that when we receive them, they actually become the other item. This one is going to stay itself, but it's going to then go away. We're going to receive that item into the system. We're going to have it there. It's going to be availability-wise applicable towards rental. So I have that stock available. And then when we're done with it and we return it to the vendor, we're going to get rid of it out of our system. Okay. And so the important thing on that is, as accounting, this subrental really is only for an expense, right? Because we are spending money to bring an item into the company. Okay. And only, again, belongs really in the subrental PO or a kind of equivalent PO. Okay. Whereas our rental item is that inventory permanent item. That's that outgoing item, right? And that key thing is, even on this subrental item, when I receive it in, once it gets to my end customer, it still technically is a rental item. I'm still renting it to them. I just subrented it from someone else first before I rented it to my end customer. Okay. So the first is for accounting reasons and for proper GL code management. It is cleaner if we keep it where this is on the PO and then we send things out still as a rental. Okay, so that's the first thing there and kind of what it's designed to do. Now, the next thing of what the issues happen when people say, I'm not concerned about that, I want to force this anyway, is when we are on the warehouse and receiving page, okay, and I can force this to get some things on here. I'll change that to all. So I don't know that I've put any in this location. Well, the key thing here, now I have some of my other warehouse, is that the documents that show up here, they're not defaulted based on any specific setting in the project element itself. They're looking through all the documents on the line item types, and they're looking for something that is an incoming resource, okay? An inbound resource, okay? So we see in here that I have both PPO, or a purchase order, and a rental purchase order, my RPO, and they have inbound. Now on this, I have subrental items that are that temporary asset, and this one is an inbound asset, but either way. So the thing that people will have is if they force this, you'll then start seeing quotes here because it's expecting those items to be inbound and you're using it still there as an outbound thing. Now, you can just ignore it, let it sit there, and again, you can do it, but again, like I say, not best practice, not what I would recommend for that, okay? That's generally the biggest thing that people see in there, okay? So now the key is, if I still have this kind of discussion, I still have the problem of I want to make sure I'm communicating things to people and I'm potentially having a discount problem. So on the communication level, it is important to remember that if I build myself a subrental for this item, that it is going to be logged on the logistics view, okay? And in Flex 5, that logistics view information will hand off to the pull sheet, okay? So I will be able to see that if people are reviewing that, okay? So there are some other ways. If we're still really worried about communication, you could also utilize the notes section to put some extra information to really highlight that to people and staff. Now, the next thing on this that I want to talk about is sometimes this is done on items where you say, we don't own this item. I don't plan to currently own this item. I only rent this item. And that's part of why I'm doing this. But other times you subrent items that you own and you rent out, but then you get busy and you've got a subrent to cover those shortages. Okay. That's just part of the way this industry works. And so the key thing for this is I don't like that discount method of, oh, I'm going to change this, because what if when I initially quoted this to my customer, it was an item that I own and I was expecting to use it. And then we got busy and we decided best case for us was to rent for this one. Well, then suddenly I'm changing the price to my customer, right? At first, I quoted it under the idea that I was going to make money using my gear, but now I've had to subrent. And so my general comment on that is that you should be checking on any item that you ever might subrent. You need to have a decent idea of what it's going to cost you to subrent, and your pricing along with your common discounts you give need to be at a percentage where you don't lose money if you subrent it. You at least break even, okay? And you got to keep in mind that there's some effort for you to go get that item to process, but that's where you kind of need to be, because sometimes when you first plan the item, you're not going to know you're subrenting. And so having a plan of removing the discount isn't good, because sometimes you can't remove that discount. You've already communicated that to the customer. They've agreed on it. You can't change that, okay? The other thing that I will state in this is that if we go here and I copy this line and I paste it again, so we have another version of it. And on this, I'm not going to change it to subrental because I'm not fixing the way to do that, but I'm going to change this other one to retail. And I believe in this system, the retail is not discountable. Okay. The key thing here, and it is kind of an overall problem and maybe something that needs to be addressed in the future, but this doesn't communicate really well. Why is it that this one doesn't have? It says it's a 10% discount, but why doesn't this one have the discount? That's the same thing if this said subrental. So while it does help you in your numbers of not adding a discount, it doesn't communicate well to your customer why that is. Okay. Now, if you, again, were doing it where you were making that subrental visible and you were communicating to that customer and in your terms you stated that, that could be okay. And that gets back to more of the problem on you'll start seeing your quotes on the receiving screen, and that's kind of the concern there. And so again, I'm not showing how to change this because I do not recommend it. It is not best practice. I just want to make sure to show and explain it can happen. There's some of the reasons why what happens with it and the problems and what I would generally say better and the best practices for that. If you have additional questions or comments, please feel free to go to the community post where this is posted and use the thread to add those questions, and I will do my best to answer and assist you in that. Thanks very much, and keep on flexing.